we wanted to maximize our time in training. We set up a little lower and a little faster than we normally would, just due to the time constriction. No big deal. We pitched into the merge, which is, you can imagine, like two medieval knights driving at each other near the speed of sound, and we blast by each other. And I opted to maneuver my jet. I was already partially inverted and partially nose low, so I just continued to roll the jet upside down and pull, and executed what you could call like a split S maneuver, which is basically where I was just diving down at the ocean with the intention of coming back up. Whereas my flight lead, he had gone nose high, and so he was going up high. And so I'm pulling a lot of G's. I'm looking out. I'm straining my body to force that blood. I'm doing the hick maneuver, and I'm forcing my head outside, looking and trying to keep him in sight. Because if you lose sight of the other guy in these fights, that's an easy way to lose. So I'm focused on that. I feel all the G-force. I'm pulling 7.5 Gs. So for rough math,
and that's a lot. That's a lot. Yeah.
7 times gravity.
Forceful. So
7 times. Oh, wow. Okay.
So
yeah. Thank you for all, both of you guys. Thank you for appeasing all my questions. Like this.
Oh man, they're good questions. Good stuff, Will.
Yeah. Thanks. I appreciate it.
So
I'm sorry, Kegan. Continue. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah,
at 7 Gs.
So I'm at 7.5 Gs, so roughly 8 Gs for rough math. So if my head and my helmet that I'm wearing weigh approximately 20 pounds at about 8 Gs, that's 160 pounds. So I essentially have 160 pounds on my head. And so your neck is working really hard to keep that weight up. You're straining, and you can feel that throughout your whole body. It feels like some people say it's like an elephant is sitting on your lap because you are just so pinned down. And I'm focused outside, and as my jet hits about bullseye nose low, so pointed straight down at the ocean, it had accelerated to a point that triggered a system in the jet, which is called the G bucket. And you can think of this like going around a sharp corner in a sports car and then having the steering wheel kick back halfway, which was pretty untimely. At the time, I mean, this is all happening in just a few seconds. I just felt the jet settle. I just felt that ease and the weight on my head. So it went from feeling like there's 160 pounds pulling on my head to feeling like there's about 80 pounds on my head, rather. And so it eased up drastically, and I felt that, but I still had the stick all the way in my lap. And so I was kind of like, what the hell? Why is the jet not turning? And with that ease in G, it eased the turn performance drastically. So I was basically just stuck in a dive at the ocean at this point. And I just went from over 2 miles up in the sky down to just a couple of thousand feet above the ocean in just a few seconds. And I could sense the ocean just coming up at me very rapidly. And 2 seconds before I impacted the ocean, I pulled the ejection handle.
2 seconds. Wow.
I was at 51 degrees nose low, so a very steep dive. And I was going 695 miles per hour, which was 604 knots indicated airspeed, or 0.95 indicated Mach, which is 95% the speed of sound. And I was in what's called the transonic region. I was at the sound barrier, essentially, when I ejected, which is about the worst place you can eject, because, you know, back when they were test piloting and trying to break through the sound barrier, all the engineers were saying you cannot get through the sound barrier because the drag is just so forceful. The jet cannot get through it no matter what we do, which they eventually proved you could get through it. But that is a region where the drag acting on the aircraft, or in this case, my body, was tremendously forceful. And a normal ejection below 200 knots, straight and level, best case scenario, guys still get flail injuries, guys still get neck injuries, get their spines compressed. It's a very violent, last resort to get you out of the aircraft in under a half second. It's basically a rocket. As soon as you pull that handle, there's a rocket motor that lights off under your ass and shoots you out of the jet. Instantaneously, you get about 50 Gs acting on your body, and that is down to about a 14 G sustained boost out of the cockpit. And so just that force is very violent. And then I hit that airflow, which was like getting hit by an explosion, a 700 mile per hour explosion. And to put that in context to what that would be like if you've ever stuck your arm or your head out a car window going down the highway at like 70 miles per hour. Well, that parasitic force or that parasitic drag that you felt acting on your arm or your face, that is exponentially stronger as you increase. So at 700 miles per hour, that force was 100 times stronger than what you would feel at 70 miles per hour. And that was so forceful, it ripped my helmet off my head, gave me a traumatic brain injury. I broke my neck. I broke my left scapula, my shoulder. Both my upper arms broke. My right humerus and my upper arm broke and tore through my brachial artery. So I was bleeding out profusely internally. My left forearm, my radius and ulna shattered in multiple pieces. My lower legs flailed around so violently. I had steel-toed boots on, and the steel-toed boots, as my legs started to break and flail around, became like a mace, like a medieval weapon, just smashing my tib fibs apart. So I had big open fractures. Chunks of my tibia fell down for like little snacks for Mary Lee as she circled below me. And so I was just destroyed. I had a variety of different nerves were severed, brachial plexus injury, median nerve was severed, nerves in my leg were severed, and all this artery damage. And I had ejected so fast it shredded the survival gear off of my vest, and it ripped open my dry suit. And within a couple seconds, my parachute opened just quickly enough to keep me from dying on impact with the water. And then I plunged into that ice cold Atlantic Ocean in fairly rough conditions. And if you've ever
been
conscious
during this ejection process, I'm sorry to stop you, but like what was happening? Like, so if you can just kind of go, was this a memory you're speaking from, or this was like, or
so this, I have retrograde amnesia from a lot of it, but between the little bit of memory snippets that I still have, and then I've been able to recreate the whole story based on the air data recorder that came out, the black box that came out with the ejection seat. We were able to get all the aircraft parameters from talking to the on-scene commanders, the rescue swimmers, and we've been able to recreate everything in very good detail. And there was a whole mishap investigation as well, which was where they were able to really pick it apart and figure out what happened. So it's kind of a combination of all those sources that I've been able to really piece it back together as accurately as possible what happened. And so
you're going in the water. So thank you. Yeah. So 37 degrees with what was the shark's name? The 16-foot shark name
Mary
waiting
Lee.
for you.
Mary
Lee waiting. Okay. Yeah.
And if you've ever been in water at that temperature, it feels like needles on your skin. It's so cold. And when your head goes underneath it, it's like brain freeze. It hurts so bad. And now my parachute that had just saved my life sunk underneath that ocean current, and there's a system that malfunctioned to disconnect me. You know, some of our survival gear is like Vietnam era equipment, and so it unfortunately in this case didn't work very well. The goal of the SeaWars is, because upper body injuries are so common in high speed ejections, they put a system into the harness that basically automatically connects your parachute, so you don't have to reach up and manually disconnect it with broken arms, which in my case was impossible. My arms didn't work anymore. They were just flailing little limp things at my sides. And so one of the SeaWars fired once it got into the salt water, but it didn't disconnect. The other one didn't even fire. So that parachute didn't disconnect properly and sunk underneath the water, and the current grabbed it. And that started to pull me underneath the ocean. And if you've ever been held underwater when you want a breath of air, it's a pretty miserable feeling. And that's where I was for a good hour and a half of just basically being teabagged repeatedly with no ability to swim against it. My dry suit had shredded, so it quickly filled with that cold ocean water and also became like a sea anchor. So I was just this soggy, wet bag just getting pulled under repeatedly. And in my mind, you know, there's this big great white shark underneath me that could come up and finish me off anytime.
What was helping you pull back up? I mean, because your limbs are broken, you know, you no ability to swim. So what was helping you, you know, kind of keep to surface and stay alive for 90 minutes? I mean, it's not like this is 5 minutes, 90 minutes.
Fortunately, my LPU, my life preserver unit, automatically inflated around my neck. And it's basically this little inflatable system around your collar that inflates up. And that floated just enough to occasionally allow me to float to the surface and get a quick breath of air before it would pull me back under.
Wow.
But
wow.
it
At
gave
least
me
something
just
was
enough.
working.
Yeah, that's about the only piece of my gear that actually worked. My beacon malfunctioned,
Wow.
so there was no beacon on my position.
Oh my
Fortunately, my flight lead saw me go down, and he dropped a GPS mark, so he knew my location, and he quickly coordinated with air traffic control to get more aircraft on my position, as he was almost out of gas at this point. So he had very limited time, and what fuel and time he had left, he got down very low and very fast. And there was a fishing vessel about a mile away from our position, and he was able to buzz or thump their bow, which is he got really low and really fast and flew over the bow of their boat and just, created like a shockwave of air that got their attention. They switched up to maritime guard, which he was able to communicate to them over the radio at this point and get them back to my position. The fishing vessel wasn't able to provide a whole lot of help, but they did provide a visual reference for my rough position because my reflective helmet had ripped off. So all I was this little tiny dark head bobbing around in the open ocean that was continually getting pulled under. So it was very difficult to see my position.
Yeah.
He got other aircraft on scene. At this point, there were multiple rescue helicopters coming in. The Coast Guard had sent a helicopter initially. They had gotten a boat out that way. And after that hour and a half, a Navy H-60 Seahawk helicopter showed up from two different squadrons, one from HS-9, which was operating off an aircraft carrier nearby, and then another one from HSC-28, who was actually about to go do a mission with the SEAL teams, and they weren't even equipped for a SAR, a search and rescue, but they came anyways. And the first helicopter that showed up, there was a miscommunication of my position, and they weren't able to get eyes on, and their rescue swimmer had gotten in the water, but he wasn't coming to me. Fortunately, the other helicopter from HSC-28 saw my position, and their pilot spotted me first, flew over to my position, and their rescue swimmer, Cheech, is his call sign, jumped in and came to save me. He said he hooked into my titanium D-ring, which is on my harness, and as he hooked into me, he said the force of that parachute just dragged both of us deep under the water. And
my God.
He's a rescue swimmer. He's a strong swimmer, but there was nothing he could do or I could do to keep that force of the parachute from just pulling us deep under. And he said he was used to training in a pool where he gets pulled under and seeing the bottom of the pool and it being very comforting. But in this case, we got pulled under, and he said he just looked down and it was just this dark blue abyss. And luckily his training kicked in. He got out his knife and was able to cut all the paracord off of me and get us back up to the surface. Got me back up into the helicopter, and then we headed to Norfolk General, which is a level 1 trauma center in Norfolk, Virginia. The ride there was
how far? Sorry, Kegan. How far off of shore were you? Like, how many miles into the ocean were you?
I was approximately 50 miles directly offshore of Virginia Beach. So we were out there a ways. And by helicopter, it was about a 45-minute flight to Norfolk, but they said it felt like it lasted for 5 hours because I was continuously coding in and out of consciousness. They were having to resuscitate me a bunch of times, and it was pretty difficult for them, thinking I wasn't going to make it. But they got me back, got me to the ER,